Our next guest, one of the most cogent voices when it comes to fiscal responsibility, not only in Washington, but in all of our great states in this country. He's the executive vice president of the National Taxpayers Union, and he is Brandon Arnold. He joins us right now. Brandon, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much, John.
I think more than any time that I've been a journalist the last 35 years, a question I get more frequently than ever before is, will they ever stop spending? Will they ever stop running out the credit card? When do we get some fiscal responsibility? When does the deficit go down? When does the spending of the government go down? And the hard answer is, I thought maybe after House Republicans took over, there'd be that moment but it hasn't happened. Give us your honest assessment. Do House Republicans have any chance before the 2024 election to turn the spending spigot down at all?
Well, let me start by trying to be as optimistic as I can, because I think it's actually a really good sign that you're getting that question repeatedly. In the past, I think people just kind of forgot about the national debt as a public policy problem. It disappeared. It kind of fell off our radar. And if there was a silver lining in the pandemic, is that it brought it back, inflation in particular, brought it back into the center of the national discourse. People said, oh my goodness, there's actually a cost associated with running trillion-dollar deficits. Oh my goodness, when I go to the grocery store, the gas station, whatever, all of a sudden everything's really expensive. And part of that problem is directly tied back to our inability to restrain federal spending. So I think more than ever, people at the grassroots level, people who actually have to pay for these higher costs, are waking up to the cold, hard reality of what's taking place in the nation's capital. So I think that's a good sign. But at the same time, it takes a long time to turn that battleship around, that cruiser around. And we've just been on this fast-paced course toward fiscal responsibility for so many years, under so many different presidents, under so many different Congresses, red, blue, Republican, Democrat, they've all kind of been pushing in the same direction. So to turn that around, it's going to take more than a new Republican House. It's going to take, ideally a president, a Senate, and a House are aligned in trying to address this problem. Whether they're Republicans or Democrats, I really don't care at this point. If they're pointing in the right direction here and trying to restrain the size and growth of the federal government, then let's roll up our sleeves and get to work.
Yeah. There is interesting, and I think you hit on something that is important. It is in the public consciousness in a way that it hasn't been for a long time. During the time it wasn't in the public consciousness, $20-30 trillion of debt kind of rolled up. And so there's that moment of people now saying, hey, I understand that when I go to the grocery store, when I go to the gas station, when I go and get a home repair and I need a new furnace or a new HVAC system, it's kind of tied to what Washington's been doing. And I think that knowledge, that daisy chaining of what I'm experiencing at the front end of my life to what's been going on in Washington, that is a really major development in the last year or two from the Bidenomics sort of outcome. How important is the push for a commission? I know Bill Hezwanga and others have begun pushing for this. It seems like the new speaker, Mike Johnson, is in favor of it. Is this sort of a moment where the intensity of light really gets turned up and real solutions are identified, or is it just another way to kick the discussion down the road a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's the trillion-dollar question here, because the answer could be yes, it could be no. It really depends on how this commission is structured. It could be just a complete political canard here. They could structure this to have no teeth. This commission will get together. They'll put out a 50-page or 150-page report providing all these options for Congress to cut spending, to trim our entitlement programs, and so forth. And Congress could throw that in the dumpster, and that would be the end of it. But a well-constructed fiscal commission, one that actually has teeth, that can put recommendations directly into committees or directly onto the floor of the House and Senate and force them to vote on these proposals and these ideas, that could help to break this logjam and start to turn things in the right direction here. So I think that's why it's so important, not just to say yes to fiscal commission or no, but to say yes, and here's how it has to look.
Yeah. And that is the key. It's the teeth of this commission. If it could actually force things to happen on the floor, at least cause people to make a declaration where they stand on some of the important spending issues of our time. That could be really consequential. If it's just recommendations that can go on the shelf alongside Erskine Bowles and the Bowles-Simpson report, then we haven't really gained anything. It'll be interesting to see as you look and you have your, which way is the team around Mike Johnson seeming to be leaning? Are they leaning towards a more toothy, inconsequential fiscal commission, or just a rubber, I don't want to say a rubber stamp, but really just a report, an academic exercise?
Yeah, I think his team, and he's still in the process of building his team, but the speaker and the team that he's building is very much committed to a fiscal commission that functions properly. And I would say that is reflected as well by the House Budget Chairman, Jody Arrington of Texas, very, very committed to addressing this problem. Now, a lot can be lost on the way. It's through the entire House of Representatives, through the Senate, signed by the president. So there's a lot to be done. It can be watered down during that process. But I think we are going to start with a very strong product. And I don't know, you mentioned a few bills. I don't know which bill they will run with, but I think the fact that they're starting this process and legitimately trying to get a good solution is encouraging. And again, I'm trying to remain as optimistic as I possibly can be.
Yeah. No, what it's a really consequential moment, and there could be some real significant outcomes. The ideal scenario for House Republicans who ran on the idea that they would get fiscal houses in order, then they didn't get their spending bills done by the deadline. Then there was one CR, then there's two CRs. But there is a moment now, a moment of goodwill, a moment of potential consensus. What would be a statement that the House Republicans can do with the remainder of the fiscal 2024 year that sent them there in the last election? Hey, we heard you. We got something done. Is it 1%, 2%? Is any reduction in spending going to send the right message, or does it need to be something more dramatic between now and next November?
I mean, I think if we are reducing spending relative to last year's enacted levels, then that's a win. And it's not as big a win as I would like, as you would like. But I think if we can get that across the finish line, then again, we're building that momentum that we need to start turning that ship around. So I think anything less than last year's enacted levels is a victory. It's a very difficult process, though, because you have so many parochial interests associated with all of these spending bills, and not just Democrat parochial interests, but Republicans wanting to plus up the Defense Department, a lot of Republicans, a lot of farm state Republicans looking at the agriculture bill and saying there's cuts there are too deep. So there are all these different vested interests. If we can spend even just a little bit and see, listen, the sky isn't going to fall. We're not going to face any kind of disastrous outcomes here if we cut in an intelligent fashion, then I think that the tide will turn and we'll build up momentum heading into the subsequent appropriations process, which really isn't that away at this point.
Literally, they're going to wrap this one up. They better get started right away on the next one because the timetable is already compressed. You've been talking about another piece of this inflation equation. Obviously, spending is a big part. All the money that's just thrown on a burning hot fire clearly has brought inflation up, and the Biden administration clearly miscalculated. It wasn't transitory. It is persistent, and all of us are paying for it. But there's a piece of the problem, the challenge for America, and that is the supply chain. There's not enough people talking about. We talked about it during COVID for a while, and then we got done with COVID. Like, we'll forget about that. But the supply chain and America's inability to produce in-house what it needs, its potential exposure being at the mercy of a frenemy or an enemy like China. This fell off the table, but it probably is one of the two or three most important issues of our time. Tell us a little bit about where the debate stands, the policy solutions stand on the supply chain, and what needs to be done to accelerate a meaningful solution.
Yeah, it was almost comical that Biden came out and announced this new task force, announced this new approach to addressing supply chains. Because like you said, it is such a critical issue. It is one of the biggest drivers of inflation. And if we go back, to the onset of the Biden administration, right when inflation was starting to creep its ugly head into our economy, he dumped all of this, like literally trillions of dollars onto that fire. And that's when we had this rampant inflation. But it started with supply chain problems that were as largely a result of the pandemic, of a lot of countries shutting down their manufacturing capabilities and logistic capabilities and so forth. So, the supply chain further, because we have higher energy costs, which are a huge input to logistics. When you talk about moving trains and ships across large bodies of water, he's ramped up labor costs by, basically doing everything that the big labor unions in Washington want, mandating union labor on every single project that the federal government has any interaction with. All these things gum up the supply chain further, and it's a reason why we've had lasting inflation at a time when it should be falling at a much quicker rate than it actually is.
Yeah, it is pretty remarkable. And looking for what he calls the new energy economy actually tip us more into a supply chain crisis. Because if you go with electric energy, well, who has all of the lithium right now? China does. And then now I've seen some U.S. energy companies in recent weeks step into the void. They're saying, we can't let this keep going on. But you look around the current energy pushes actually are going to exacerbate supply chain and also exacerbate the cost of energy, which is only going to drive inflation up again. There is a real disconnect in the strategy and the needs of the American people. Is that only something to be fixed with an election at this point? It doesn't seem like the Biden administration is dialed into a common sense thing. We're more dependent on Russian uranium for our nuclear power plants. We're more dependent than we were when Donald Trump handed the keys over on oil from foreign countries, particularly places like Venezuela, Iran, other places like that. And we're incredibly dependent on China for solar and batteries. No sense. Do you have any sense that the Biden administration appreciates that its strategies are actually tipping the supply chain to an even tougher position?
You're making it really hard for me to be optimistic here. I'm trying to be, but it's funny. He just keeps going back to the well. When it's EV subsidies, it's wind turbines, and all that stuff may help down the road. I'm not really sure, but all that stuff may help down the road when we talk about climate change and so forth. I don't know, but I know right now we talk about the immediate needs of the American, lower energy costs. You're talking about security in terms of not relying on foreign unstable countries to get our basic needs. We saw this flame up recently with the baby formula shortage. One of the problems there.
Perfect example, right?
Yeah, we were putting parents in an inordinate amount of distress, whether they could feed their child or not. When meanwhile, I understand if we don't want to get baby formula from some shady factory in China, but there were friendly countries in Europe that were producing baby formula. All we need to do is bring that here, and we'll make people's lives a lot better. Now, in the long term, maybe we want to reshore. Maybe we want to have additional manufacturing capabilities in this country. But in the short term, let's just bring that in from safe, friendly countries in Europe where they have high consumer product standards and so forth. It's just nonsense. We've had this bifurcated idea, or that we can't trade with because it risks national security. We need to have an embrace of trading with countries like Canada and Australia and Europe and Japan that have stable economies, that have standards that are comparable to our own. And yes, we need to be a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit more even protective when it comes to dealing with Iran and China and other bad actors out there. But we just haven't really mastered that yet. And that's really snarled our supply chains. And it's created these shortages. It's created energy insecurity. It's created just the inability for our manufacturing sector to get the things and to create jobs in this country. And Biden just hasn't gotten that.
Yeah, that's pretty extraordinary to see what comes next in the process, and the gaps keep getting bigger. It's funny when you talk to people on the front lines of corporate America and the front lines of energy industry, they see this gap just widening and they're like, stop, somebody stop the world. We got to get off for a second. There just is a disconnect. That said, there are a lot of smart people right now in the think tanks that are preparing for the next election, for the next administration, that are really Brandon, you guys are doing a lot of important work at the National Taxpayers Union to create common sense plans for the next government, the next president, the next executive branch, the next Congress to change things. So while we're tipping towards what feels like a really untenable position, an election could really radically change the approach of the country quickly. Tell us a little bit about all the important work that you're doing at NTU, that, Heritage and AFPI. There's a lot of people working on the next agenda, right? The agenda that actually could reverse and put America on a better footing. That's probably the most optimistic thing in the works right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of organizations working behind the scenes right now to create an agenda. Obviously we have a tough time with this president and with the Senate that doesn't do much of anything, but when it acts, doesn't really do things the right way, by and large. But setting that blueprint out for the year 2025, when we very well may have a new president, when the Congress will look different. I don't know which way the winds will blow, but creating that agenda so we know here's what we need to do on tax policy, because we have some huge inflection points coming up with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, large portions of that falling off the books. Obviously we need to address regulatory policy. That's been a huge area of emphasis, and we've seen that not just under the Biden administration, but under previous administrations as well, usurping the power of Congress, centralizing it within the executive branch, and then essentially dictating parts of the economy that really should be under the purview of the legislative branch. We need to unwind that, and we need to have a legislative approach rather than a regulatory approach to everything that ails this country. So there's a lot to unwind on the regulatory front. I mentioned trade policy. I think certainly healthcare policy. Costs are just rampant, and Biden's approach here is, I think, completely wrong-headed. He wants to use the Defense Production Act to essentially take over the pharmaceutical industry in some ways, to tell them what to manufacture and what not to manufacture. We shouldn't have that kind of top-down approach. The list goes on and on, as you know very well, John. There's a lot of work to be done, and people that are far smarter than I are fortunately putting together these, hopefully be taken up by the president, the next president, and the next Congress, and run with and implemented into law.
Yeah, that's the opportunity. That's the reason for optimism, which is that there are people really working on solutions, and they'll be at the ready should there be an electoral change in November 2024. I want to finish with something that may be one of those surprise moments. So we had a good opening to the holiday Christmas shopping season. A significant shift away from box stores to online. That's been a continuation. Prices came down a little bit, which is a sign that the retail industry is trying to lure people in by lowering prices since people are tired of inflation. So toys were down, computers were down. But you issued a very, very stark warning, which is don't get over your skis, accumulate a lot more debt, because after the first of the year, the economy has a real chance. A little bit about the holiday euphoric spending and its potential consequences should the economy hit a bump in the first quarter, like a lot of people fear right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of really deep discounts in the retail space right now, these aggressive price points that retailers are putting there, is because they're worried about consumer spending going forward. Because they know they have to be aggressive to make those deals now. They want to clear out as much inventory because they don't know what consumer behavior is going to look like. And if anything, they're pessimistic about consumer behavior for 2024. And I share that concern. We've seen credit card debt just absolutely skyrocket over the past couple of years. We're well over $1 trillion. It's the highest it's ever been in this country. So you just wonder, are consumers maxing out their credit cards? Are they getting leveraged to a point where they're not going to have that disposable income? They're not going to have access to credit, because we know credit card companies are tightening their standards right now, making it more difficult for people to get credit cards or to get a mortgage or an auto loan or what have you. So as those standards tighten up and as consumers max out their credit cards and other lines of credit, are we going to see a drop-off in consumer spending? My sense is I think there's a good chance that we will. And you think the economy is more than 2/3 driven by consumer spending. So if that starts to dip, We have broad concerns across the economy. We're going to see less economic output. We're going to see a decline in our economic numbers. So that could mean all sorts of horrible, but we could see negative economic growth. We could see a reduction in available jobs. We've already started to see a little bit of weakening in what had been a very strong labor market. Fewer hires reported in the last economic report that came out of the Census Department. So there's a lot of stuff happening right now that making me end on a pessimistic note, John. But yeah, I would advise to consumers, take advantage of those deals, but don't overextend yourself. You definitely want to have that buffer there, that those savings that you can rely on in the event of some sort of unfortunate economic downturn.
Yeah. No doubt. Caution is the best side of wisdom. No doubt about it. If you're cautious, and then you won't feel the impact if you're already preparing ahead for it. And I think that's what makes NTU particularly so important. You guys are excellent at seeing what's over the horizon and getting people the information. One last thing, because we always worry about the IRS. We always have our eye on the IRS. A big blink for the second year in a row. The IRS suspended or delayed its plan to start creating required tax forms for any money that came in via Venmo or other eBay, other places to down to $600 is now become reportable. They blinked at the last moment to be a major nightmare for taxpayers, wasn't it?
Oh, an absolute disaster on the horizon here. So it's a weird situation because on one hand, I'm glad that the IRS delayed it because it would have been such a headache for everyday Americans that use Venmo, that sold tickets on StubHub, maybe paid their roommate for rent on PayPal. All these people would have been getting confusing tax forms in the mail, and they would have, in some instances, thought that was all taxable liability. It probably wasn't. It may have been. It requires some additional research, and it would have just been a huge nightmare. And I don't think the IRS admitted they didn't have a plan on how to deal with the tens of millions of additional forms that were going to go out to people, all the phone calls they were going to get, all the confusion that was going to cause. So yes, I'm glad that the IRS delayed it for the second year in a row, but did they have the statutory authority to do so? I don't think so. I think they're kind of coloring outside the lines here, and we should be concerned when the IRS does things that it's not statutorily allowed to do, even if the end result is a positive one, because if they can act outside of the law on this issue in a positive way, what else can they do in ways that are harmful to taxpayers? So there's a lot of concern. On Capitol Hill. I know the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, is very, very concerned about the IRS's actions here. And I'm sure there's going to be some hearings in the near future to get to the bottom of what the IRS is thinking. Yeah,
very important. And like you said, probably a great amount of heartburn averted for this tax season, but it's still sitting out because of the passage of the law. And this is going to be an interesting debate to see what happens in tax year 2024, because that seems to be the year that some of these judgments will come due. Brandon, it is always an honor to have you on. It's always fun to see the great work that you and all of our friends at NTU does. For folks who want to stay in the National Taxpayers Union, what's the best way for them to stay in touch with all the great work, your rating system? You get this great rating system so you can look up your congressperson and understand where they stand, where your senator stands. How do we stay best connected to all the great work of NTU?
Well, thanks for the kind words, first of all. But NTU.org is our website. We're of course on all sorts of social media, Facebook, Twitter. We have a YouTube page. You can watch clips, including clips of your television show that when you were kind enough to allow me on the program. So all that information can be found there. Check us out. We appreciate any kind of feedback that your listeners and your viewers might have for us. We're always accept as much feedback as we possibly can.
Yeah, no, it's great. Our audience loves you because you give us real facts, and so few people are talking about the crushing effect of debt, the crushing effect of the IRS and some of its works on innovation, on the budget, on everyday Americans' lives. That you are such a unique and valued voice in America. So it's such a great to have you on. And I know we'll have you on soon on the TV show. And of course, back here at John Solomon Reports as well. Thanks so much for joining us, Brandon.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great conversation. All right, folks, one more good one to go. Natalia Middlestat up next right after these messages.